That's good.
Welcome to WeatherBrains. The wrong James is talking, but this is what you get as we have one with a voice and one without a voice. We're
One
halfway
with
to
hair,
everyone's
one without
fantasy.
hair. It's very, very similar.
What number are we?
872.
872. And this is where I say this is the longest running weather podcast that they said would never last.
This is actually the pre-show. See, I can't talk. I got to let you guys take it. This is the pre-show segment where we share boring personal stories, humorous anecdotes, and we say outrageous things. So,
well, we've come up with a new name for you, James. A lot. You're now Okie James. Is that going to stick?
I don't know. As long as you just, don't make the initials stick. We don't want that.
You haven't been running through any airports recently?
No. Well, I mean, not intentionally. I guess I have, but not for a commercial.
Let's see if we can invite our guest. He should have gotten that same invite.
Yeah, he's been invited and he accepted it.
Okay, good. Well, it's going to be a fascinating show. As long as just the panelists show up, it will be a great show. Just
the greatest show ever, because I have no voice. The greatest show ever.
Kim and Neil have things to say.
Yep. Good things.
I will sit back and learn.
Yeah, when you think of what we were thinking a week ago tonight, and
yeah, there's considerably less gloom hanging over this evening. At least looking forward.
A really frightening situation for sure.
Goodness.
And it turned out to be terrible. You look at those videos like Mark Sudduth captured and the Severe Studios people. That's what we need to be showing to everybody.
Yep.
Because, you go back to Michael, you go back to Ida, you go to this hurricane, and you see that is an unsurvivable situation, right at the coast. And then you compare that to the maps Dr. Jacobs is going to use for his pick of the week tonight. Most of those coastal counties, in a Cat 4, we're going to get 9 feet above water, above dry ground.
Yeah, and
you can't take a chance with that.
You don't want to be anywhere near that.
Mm-mm.
Especially when you've got issues like that are potentially fatal when you're talking about a long-term power outage. I mean, we've got people on dialysis and it's terrible. You've
got to run those worst case scenarios for literally every, location in the cone. And then you've got to be ready to adapt at that window where you can't evacuate any longer. You could have still evacuated down there on Wednesday morning.
We get the fact that weather is a process, but I don't think enough people do. You just can't take that snapshot 2 days in advance and it's frozen.
Well, I tell you, I learned when I was about 5 years old. You better understand the weather, because nobody's looking out for you on this thing. Whether you're hanging out the back of a trailer looking for a tornado or deciding when to go to your storm pit, as my grandmother said, you got to take your own life into your hands and make sure you make the right decisions. You can't leave this stuff to chance in these dangerous areas.
No, and admittedly, it is very difficult for some people that want to leave.
That's true. That's the one thing you got to still consider. They're looking for any reason to stay, because it's hard to leave, or they can't leave. They don't have a way, and that's heartbreaking to me.
Yeah, but
because it's one thing to say I'll get in the car and leave, but some people can't.
Yeah,
some people, their whole fortune is tied up in that little trailer or whatever it is, and they don't want to leave it. I get that. Kim, James from Alabama has no voice tonight. So.
Oh no! What happened? Can you sign it to us?
I have no earthly idea, no idea whatsoever.
Oh my gosh!
I feel fine. I feel great. I just have no voice, so I will sit back and learn tonight.
What do you mean, no voice? Oh my God! I wish I had a voice like that.
Yeah,
sounds like a helicopter
voice for all of us.
What's going on, everybody?
Good to see you, Rich. This was kind of crazy that we had booked you for tonight.
Oh, wow. Just nuts, man.
Mm,
Just nuts.
a lot to
Yeah.
talk about tonight.
This
Is
is going
Gina
to be a
Yasko
great
going to
show.
join us? Kim, is she going to join us?
So
Gina?
oh, Gina, oh my gosh. I said I was going to invite her, and then this is my first day back officially from maternity leave at work. So it was a little bit nuts. But I
course.
can text her and see if we can get her last minute to join us. I will do that.
I think we're fine, but if you want to.
Okay. Yeah.
She's
And it's
certainly
a
a big
conversation
voice.
that can go on for some time.
How much time you got, Rich? We might be going till midnight.
Right?
About an hour.
Do you have a show tonight, Rich? Or you,
I don't. I'm done for the day.
and we got to make sure Dr. Jacobs joins us. We could just publish all the emails between Kim and James and Neil and Rick and just make a book out of it. It would write itself.
It's been fun, James A.
Uh-huh.
I've learned all kind of big
been
words.
learning mode. I've been reading and learning. Nice
I think-
to see lights on behind Rich. That's very good to see.
Mm.
Yeah, that is good.
Man, passing the power trucks on the freeway coming home tonight, there must have been 100 of them. A lot of them from Mississippi. I noticed the plates are all from Mississippi.
Yeah, I imagine Alabama Power's got a big contingent down there too. All these utilities too.
Everybody trying to help out, you know.
I think that was one of the things I remember most about watching after Hurricane Charlie in 2004 were just hours after the landfall, those just lines of power trucks heading south into Charlotte County. That was pretty amazing. Here comes the cavalry.
These storms were so much alike. Oh my God.
It's
Here-
crazy. We had in our internal email thread today, there was some, I think, was it Rick who sent the service assessment pieces from Charlie? And oh my gosh, it reads exactly like this event in every, even the forecast being, for Tampa, and then it took that hard turn and went to the exact same place and then made landfall the same way back in South Carolina. Everything. It's, has anyone compared the synoptic setups? Are these just copy paste events?
Damn near the same pressure, hit the same city, Cayo Costa. Ian made landfall at 3:45. Charlie was 3:05.
Wow.
I mean, crazy. So many
That's
similarities.
eerie.
There's like 8 or 10 similarities.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
We didn't learn our lesson after the first one.
Oh,
I remember that day very clearly.
Well, we got to get the show started, guys. And again, I can't do any of this, so somebody's going to have to open the show. And I'm just here to press buttons tonight. So
James, you did such a good job with the pre-show there. You got to take it here. Here comes Dr. Jacobs. That's good.
yeah.
Welcome.
So we are on television. So I'm going to get the recorders going, and one of you fine folks here will have to be the show starter and ender and all that stuff.
I nominate Bill. He knows the
No,
script.
you do
Like
the
you
open.
did.
I'll do the close.
So just do a countdown and go.
All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Welcome to WeatherBrains. Wrong James is talking right now, but this is the podcast that they said would never last. But thanks to Rick Smith, it has motored forward. And with a head shake too. It's going to be a great show tonight. I'm going to turn it over to Bill because we're going to be discussing some very important things tonight.
Yeah, I guess we could just jump right in. That's a good idea, and we'll introduce the panelists as we go around. James, tonight's guest WeatherBrain was the suggestion of listener Harvey Day. He was, telling us that we were going to have a night of fun and frivolity. Unfortunately, the events of last week sort of changed that a little bit. We won't be serious all the night, but the impacts of Ian in Florida are terrible, and the issues that relate to our science are very, very important. Somehow it doesn't feel like a victory, even though the forecasts seem to be pretty good. A lot of people call it unprepared. And this event has sort of exposed some of the challenges in communicating our hurricane forecast. We'll dig deeply into those issues on the show tonight with Rich Fields, an Emmy Award meteorologist, television meteorologist at WTSP in Tampa. Rich, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. I thought when you guys had me on, you wanted to talk about The Price is Right or something.
Well, we are going to talk about that, and we do want to hear about that, and that's the fun and frivolity part. But it is very interesting that we had you scheduled for tonight. So that seems to have been fate. We thank Harvey for suggesting you. Rich, tell us a little bit about you real quick, and then we'll kind of dive into some of our issues tonight.
I started in radio years ago, as many did or do, and went to school in the University of Florida for broadcasting, Mississippi State for meteorology, and that got interrupted in 2004 when I got picked to be the announcer on The Price is Right, and I was there for about 7 seasons, and then went back to weather again for KCBS KCAL in Los Angeles, and now at the CBS affiliate in Tampa, WTSP.
So was it Roddy? Is that what memory serves me? Did he pass away? Is that what
Correct.
created that opportunity? Because I remember he had been there for how long?
Long time. I think 17 years. Johnny Olson was the original announcer. He was there like 15 years, passed away. So far, I'm the only one that left and didn't pass away. But yeah, Rod was there a long, long time. He was my predecessor, the guy with the sparkly jackets. Matter of fact, I got a couple of his jackets in the other room. I have so much Price is Right memorabilia. I took a lot.
Do you wish you could have that big long stick mic to do weather with?
It's funny because Mr. Barker gave me one. It's not in this room. It's upstairs in my office, but he gave me one out of his house, out of his dresser drawer in his house one day. And he knew what a fan I was. And I had taken him other things to be autographed, and I was always collecting something. I never stole anything. I kid. I may not have asked the right person, but I never stole anything.
Talk about that experience. That's as American as apple pie in a lot of ways. The Price is Right. I remember watching it as a kid. 10 o'clock on weekday mornings, we were glued to the set. What made us all love that show, and what makes us, still love game shows to this day, Rich?
I think it's simplicity. Number one, anybody can make a guess, and that's really what you're doing. You're guessing at a price. And, certainly Mr. Barker and his hosting ability and his ability to really connect with the audience. I remember one day he told me, he said, Rich, if you ever want to be a game show host and you get a chance to do this show, he said, there's 3 audiences on this show. And I kind of looked at him quizzically, and he said, yeah, well, there's the person you're standing with, he's your audience, she's your audience, Beth, I want you to win this today, and we're going to go for that $10,000. That's an audience. There's the studio audience, I'm sorry, the television audience at home, the camera. And then there's the studio audience out there. And Bob, he would be, I want you to win this money. All right, everybody, here we go. You ready out there? And he would play all 3 audiences, and just, I think that kind of made the show. It just, the way he bounced off of everybody and connected with everybody, the people at home, the people in the studio, and the person next to him. I mean, just the king.
So Rich, what other game shows were you involved in? Because The Price is Right obviously is probably the marquee one, but Wheel of Fortune's no slouch either, for sure.
Yeah, Roddy passed away, and I auditioned. I got Price is Right, and then Charlie O'Donnell passed away, and the executive producer, Harry Friedman, at the time of both Wheel and Jeopardy, called me up late one night. It was October 31st. It was actually after midnight, so it was actually November 1st. And he said, Rich, Charlie O'Donnell just passed away. I just got a call from his family. And I was like, oh my God. First of all, I didn't know why Harry Friedman, the executive producer of these shows, was calling me. I just picked up the phone, and he was like, hi, Rich, it's Harry Friedman from Wheel and Jeopardy. I said, hi, Harry. He said, Charlie O'Donnell passed away earlier this evening. I was like, what? And he said, look, we're certainly going to have time to grieve, but we're supposed to be in production tomorrow. a lot of money's been spent, you know, Sony on these studios and people and the whole 9 yards. I mean, there's a schedule, you know, just because Wheel and Jeopardy, you know, have these dedicated studios doesn't mean that somebody's not using them the next day they're done taping. So being able to squeeze in shows, it's difficult. It's very difficult on these lots. And he says, look, we're booked to do Wheel, you know, we got a 8-week run coming up. Can you come in and do it? And I was like, yes. I mean, I didn't know what to say, really. I never even thought about doing Wheel of Fortune. You know what I mean? It's like just crazy. But I mean, I certainly watched the show, and I've always been a game show fan, but I just said yes. And boy, walking in that next morning was just the weirdest thing, man. You knew somebody had passed away. I mean, literally, it was like you could feel the coldness, man. And everybody was sad, and it was horrible. It was a horrible situation to walk into. At least when, you know, Roddy passed away, months went by, you know, and they had other substitute announcers, you know, and Bob was auditioning other people. But this was the next day, and it was just the oddest thing, you guys. It was just so weird.
Well, Troy Kimmel, we're glad you could join us here. Sorry that invite didn't get to you. We're talking to Rich Fields, who has done long stints announcing on game shows in addition to being an Emmy award-winning meteorologist. But I remember who the letter turner was before Vanna White. Troy, do you remember that? That will really date me.
I'm happy to say that I don't.
All right, Rich Fields, do you remember who that was?
God, I do know this. It's tip of my tongue.
Susan Stafford.
Thank God, that's it. Susan Stafford.
I was so in
Good
love
for
with
you.
her when I was in the 8th grade that I sent her a letter, and I got a postcard back that I kept taped on my desk for forever, because I thought was
I
pretty
thought it
big
might
time.
be
And
a
she would,
cease or desist letter, but
that probably was coming next, Troy. But we're glad you.
there's your
you're
show
like-
title. Yeah.
So, Rich, tell us, how did that influence your delivery of the weather over time? I mean, these are pretty incredible big positions, and you've been at some really huge stations. So, talk about. I know your father made you a weather station when you were a kid. That had an influence on you.
Wow,
How did that?
that's true. See, two of my loves in life, I'm lucky enough to have been able to do. I mean, I loved weather, and as a kid, my dad he recognized that, and he made me a little weather station as a kid, and so I was fascinated with weather from day on, and game shows. I mean, so to be able to cross and do both was just, I mean, I'm really blessed about that. But I'll tell you what Price did for me. It loosened me up. You talk about delivery difference or presentation difference. Working at the Price is Right. I did 9 game shows. I've voiced 9 different game shows, 8 network, 1 state of Florida. The Florida Lottery's Flamingo Fortune. It was one of these, satellite game shows, but it was produced by Mark Goodson Productions. And so that was my very first game show ever. And who did I get to work for? Mark Goodson. So that was actually a calling card later when Roddy passed away, and I made that phone call to the Price is Right production offices, to be able to say, hey, I called Roger Dobkowitz, the executive producer, and I said, it's the weirdest thing. I couldn't believe he picked up the phone, number one. I called the Price is Right, and I said, hi, Roger Dobkowitz, please, executive producer. Yeah, hang on a second. 1 ringy dingy, 2 ringy dingies, and Roger picks up the phone. Hello. And I said, hi, Roger. Yeah. My name's Rich Fields. You don't know me from a hole in the wall, but I used to do a Mark Goodson game show down in Florida. I was the announcer on that show. Really? Because Roger had worked for Goodson for eons, like up to that time, 30 some years. And so I was really fortunate enough to be able to have that name to throw out there. And I think that might have been one of the things that got me, at least to get him to listen to my demo. But I think being on Price and doing 15 minutes of warm up every day, I think I did something like I wish my wife was here. She knows the number, 1,580 some shows total, at 15 minutes before every show. Well, you add up the minutes of stand up. So I think doing that, being thrown into that situation, having to cover that before every show, before introducing Bob or Drew, I think that just really loosened me up for on-air delivery and things like that. But weather, I've always been interested, always fascinated.
I remember the partner, Mark Goodson, right? Bill Todman and Mark Goodson.
Right. Exactly right.
And and as I put in our chat, why I remember that and I walk out of Costco wondering where I park.
Yeah.
Mark Goodson, Bill Todman production. Right. Bill Todman was actually the brains behind the whole thing. Go to the Television Academy's website. I'm on there as a game show historian, but I do a whole video, a whole 10-minute piece on Bill Todman. Not everybody's heard of Mark Goodson, but not a lot of people know about Bill Todman. Brilliant, genius guy.
I think our brains must have been forming at that point, because all that sort of stuff just sticks in my mind so vividly from the middle 70s, music and television, radio, all those crazy things. Because I'm like you, Kim, I couldn't remember Marshall Shepard's first name this afternoon. Like, honey, what is Dr. Shepard's first name? And I thought she was like Marshall. I'm like, oh, okay. Well, I couldn't remember it to save my life. But that's so. Tell us one funny story. There's got to be a great story that stands out from all these game show times, and then we'll kind of dig into the hurricane a little bit more.
Sure. I gave away a Corvette by mistake once.
Oh. No.
How did that work out for you?
Oh man, I thought I was out with Bob. I thought that this was during a taping, and I haven't told this story much, but because it makes me sad to think about it. But big goof. I mean, well, number one, there was a goof on so many levels. Okay, here's what happened. So we're doing a show, and I think the game was Lucky 7. I don't know if there's any fans who know what Lucky 7 is. It was for a car. And Lucky 7 is usually a high dollar car, and this was a $60,000 sports car. And so, Bob says, Janet, you could win this, and a new car. And the crowd goes wild. It's a whatever year it was. It's a 2007 Chevy Corvette convertible. It's got this, it's got that, it's got this. Retail value is $61,880. Bob. He was like, and he had his mic, and he just dropped his mic like that. And he looked over at the producer's table, and in my headphones, I hear stop tape, hold everybody. And then the studio announced the essay, hold, please, everybody hold. All the cameras hold their position. And I'm like, oh no, what happened? And Bob goes, after he looks back from the producer's table, goes, did you just read the price? And I looked down at the copy. I said, yeah. Bob looks over and he goes over to the producer's table, and I see his hand going like this, and the mic in this hand like this. And Roger Dobkutz is like over to me. And finally, Roger comes across the stage over to me. I'm like, what happened? He said, you read the price of the car. I said, well, it's right there. It's printed right there on the script, Roger. He said, but it shouldn't have been, and you should have known. We never give the prices. But guys and girls, what you got to remember is we've been through 2 production meetings already about this show, 1 full table read on the show, reading every single line, a full hour rehearsal before the show, 5 times that script was gone through. And nobody, anytime I ever read it, never ever said, don't read that.
Yep.
So you're saying they didn't vet the script well? Haha.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
man.
what did Bob Barker do? I'm thinking of a number.
Well, we came back, and Bob, anytime there was a mistake, Bob liked to leave it in the show. And although he didn't get the play out of it, out of the game, out of everything, he come back and he said, this was still, we hadn't come back to camera yet. And he said to the audience, well, our new announcer, Rich Fields, just gave away a $60,000 sports car. That's going to take quite some time for you to pay back, young man.
Yeah.
And the audience laughed. And I didn't know if he was half kidding or what. And he said, and Bob said, it wasn't his fault. And I guess I can't shoot the messenger. And I said, thank you, Mr. Barker. Yes, of course. And so they all of a sudden they're counting back to tape, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And Bob comes back and he goes, well, I guess, Janet, there's nothing more to say. Rich just gave you the price of the car. That car is yours. And she screamed, "What? It is? Yes, that car's yours. We're giving it to you." And so ding, 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 all the bells go off and everything. And she runs over to the car and she's hugging models and kissing the car. And I just, it was like one of the worst days ever for me. And at The Price is Right. I thought that was it. I thought, this is it. I'm done. I am done.
Well, I'm glad it wasn't the end of your career, and I hope she had the money to pay the taxes for the car when it was all said and done.
Not many people know that. That's true.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a big deal. That's for sure. Now you were there on the ground in Florida this week. When I wrote you, this weekend, I was worried that you wouldn't be able to join us, and we would have clearly understood that. But I was thrilled that you could. Tell us what it was like to be there in the middle of all this, Rich.
Surreal. Pardon me, just got choked up because I was just seeing the images. To see the devastation, it's mind-boggling. I mean, you watch this on TV all your life, and you see stuff wherever, Iraq, Iran, Vietnam, whatever. You know what I mean? You see stuff happening all over the world, and you're like, oh, it affects you a little bit, but wow, and I grew up here and been through a lot of storms, rode out many hurricane warnings, saying it's not going to hit here, or hoping it's not going to hit here, or, even as a kid with mom and dad going, oh, we're okay, or, oh, we better move for this one, or, so I was here for a lot of them, but I think I might have said this in my note or email to you today or yesterday. I said, I will never not evacuate again. This time I was working it, so it was a different story. We had to evacuate the whole building. You guys know about that?
Tell us about it.
Yeah, WTSP is it's right on Tampa Bay. I mean, as you come across Tampa Bay from Tampa to Pinellas County, when you get off the Gandy Bridge, boom, WTSP is right there. I mean, it's evac A. It's an A zone. I think its elevation is 6 or 8 feet. Right outside our doors, our back doors, the bay is probably 100 feet away. So any amount of storm surge is going to flood that building. 3 feet or more, that building is going to be flooded. It's going to have water on the first floor. And so whenever a storm is coming close, or is projected to hit Tampa Bay, and you guys know well. I mean, this thing, first of all, the models had it going into the Panhandle. Then it had it going into like Citrus, Hernando, Pasco County, what we call the Nature Coast. Then it had it coming in right over Pinellas County, almost over Tampa Bay. And then within, what was it? Not even 24 hours, maybe. All of a sudden, it's 2 hours to our south, driving by car. I mean, when they put up that hurricane warning for the coast, I mean, it's nothing to play with. It is nothing to play with. I don't know if lay people are ever going to see this, but it's nothing to mess around with. You got to get out. So we had to evacuate our whole building. We went to a bunker facility, WMOR, in Tampa. It's over by the Hard Rock Casino and the Florida State Fairgrounds, really high ground and deep inland. And so we did 3 days there, 12-hour shifts. We were all on 12-hour shifts. Everybody, anchors, reporters, photojournalists, meteorologists, everybody was on 12-hour shifts, and red team, blue team. And it was just nonstop, man. It was crazy.
Dr. Neil Jacobs, former NOAA administrator, glad you're with us tonight. We've been having an interesting conversation. Talk about the models for a minute, because Rich covered how, some of the models waffled there. Talk about your assessment of the models.
It was kind of as expected. I think that it's become kind of trendy to bash the GFS. But the GFS had some really good runs, and the Euro, there was a couple, I can't remember which day it was, but there was a 0 and a 6Z run of the Euro that leaned way west and then came back east. And then the Euro was keeping over land. I think the UK Met model actually was the first to sort of sniff out it was going to go into the ocean and come back and hit the Carolinas. So it's, the beauty of having all these different models is it gives the forecasters kind of a variety and an assortment to look at, and very trained forecasters who've been doing this for a long time know which models perform better in which different scenarios. But I think that in general, it was initial conditions that plagued the models. I mean, there was the subtropical jet coming in from the lower west over Mexico that was going to push it east. And then there was a short wave that was diving down that was going to sort of snag it and pull it to the north. And the problem is, if you back up that 5 to 7 day forecast, the observations for those potential situations were way up in Alaska and the Yukon and then over Mexico, where we just don't have any really good upper air observation information. And I think the European model does a little bit better with the satellite data assimilation, which probably gave it the edge in that 5 to 7 day window.
Dr. Jacobs, that's kind of you're touching on what I'd like to go at. How did things improve with the GFS when that whole wad of supplemental soundings went up that day? And did the aircraft soundings play a role in this at all either?
The aircraft data definitely does, but the problem is you don't get a lot of vertical profiles where if you're far away from airports, it's all cruise data. And there's not a lot of cruise data in that region in the upper parts of Canada, unless you're looking at cross polar flights. And those are like just maybe like 5 or 6 at best. And so the Weather Service started launching supplemental balloons on the 6 and 18Z. But most of the data was, Pacific Northwest, like Washington State, Montana, the Dakotas. And the real problem was once that shortwave trough got east of Alaska, it was kind of over the Yukon and then down through Alberta, which even if Environment Canada started doing additional SON launches, it's so sparse up there that there's really not a lot of information. And it wasn't until a lot of those features made it into CONUS where the model really locked in. And I think you saw the GFS abruptly shift back east. It really had to do with it finally starting to see where that trough was and how much impact it was going to have. And at the same time, how much influence that subtropical jet was going to have. Not to mention the outflow from Fiona was still an influencing factor, amplifying the ridge trough access to the east, and then also sort of damping a lot of the outflow for Ian. So it was a super complicated situation. I mean, when you start to think about all these different things, this is going to create a lot of dissertations in the future. I think I've got so many ideas running through my head. If you're a PhD student looking for an idea for a thesis, let me know.
Hey, Neil, Troy here. And I know we've had offline a lot of conversation about the models, but help this Aggie out here just for a second. Talking to people down there, the one thing that I heard from some people, especially around Fort Myers and that area up toward Cape Coral, and it was that when they went to bed Tuesday night, that thing more or less, Rich, I said, that thing still late Tuesday still sort of had the eyes on Tampa Bay. And then we're sitting there watching Key West getting whipped pretty good down there. And then we're watching it. Those people around Cape Coral and around Fort Myers, they went to bed that night. Now, were they on the dry side of the storm? No, but everyone was thinking Tampa. And Rich said 24. I would say 12 hours, because I mean, that thing, you woke up the next morning and talking to people in Fort Myers, they're sitting there going, okay, what is going on here? Something's wrong. And they look and the eye wall is on their front porch. I think the nighttime hours kill people. I think there were a lot of assumptions made. Guess what assumptions will do? This is where you have to really stay up with it. But I'm thinking that Tuesday night and going to bed thinking everything was going to be okay was one of the major things. Rich, am I wrong on that? You're very close.
You're exactly right. And Bobby Deskins, our chief at WTSP today, was running some timing on when models came out, when runs came out, and when announcements went out, and so on and so forth. And I think he said it was 11 hours before landfall that it was pretty much clear that it was going to hit just north of Fort Myers. And you're right about that, and it being night. And I think some counties were even late on evacuation orders because of that. And I know there's, I don't want to talk too much about it, but I know the investigative group at WTSP is actually looking into that. What time did counties make the call? What time did Lee County officials make the call to evacuate? What time did Charlotte County officials make the call to evacuate? And I think you're right. It's because of the dark hours, and everybody went to bed thinking.
I talked to some people down there, Rich, and I mean, they said, "What happened?" And I said, "Well, the thing just, I mean, that eye also it strengthened in there really rapidly in that time that it was northeast of the Dry Tortugas, and then back up. It really strengthened. The eye got it went through eye wall replacement cycles
a couple times,
in the cycle in that period, and I think that I will tell you now, I think the National Hurricane Center did a good job. I think we have to figure out at this group, Rich, we've sort of had this discussion about how you present this to public. And I'm depressed today because I've read everything that we've written and I'm not sure we're any closer to an answer. I'm afraid, I mean, a cone is a cone is a cone. And by the way, how many people realize 5 days out that the Weather Service, the Hurricane Center will tell you that five days out, 60 to 70% of the time it'll be in the cone. But what does that mean? It means 30 to 40% won't be in the cone. And so I don't know. In reading, could we stop our emails now? Because I've read them all the last few days, and I'm sitting here going, damn, I'm not sure that I'm really encouraged by anything I'm seeing here by esteemed colleagues. I mean, I love Neil's discussions. They were great discussions, but I'm not feeling any better about it. And especially given the fact that the federal government, God bless them, something that should take 4 months takes 5 years in the federal government. If we're going to do something, it's going to take forever to get it done. We have 2 or 3 more years, Kim, left of advisory. That's a year and a half after they told us to getting rid of advisory. And so I kind of beat on that drum, but I just, and then I think about the people who died.
It's heartbreaking. Rich, do you think the waffling of the models hurt the situation with the folks in the places that were not directly under the points? And we'll get into the cone and the points here in just a minute, but do you think the waffling of the models hurt the situation?
I think it's had a lot to play in it. I mean, I'll just go by my own neighbor behind us over here. We get back from having evacuated and we come back to the house. They had just opened the beach back up. The cops are still checking your ID to make sure you live here. And our neighbors are here. Ranch style home, one story ranch style home. And my wife said, she's out walking down. She said, "You guys didn't leave?" And they're like, "Oh, no. And she said, "Why?" "Oh, well, they put out those projections and, it wasn't coming near here. And then the next time I looked, it was going far to the south." So he's talking like maybe a 3-4 day span. He sees it one time and it's going up to Panhandle or the Nature Coast, Citrus, Hernando, Pasco County, someplace up there. And then a couple of days later, he looks at it or hears somebody explain, "Well, as you look at this cone, you see these white edges here. The eye could be on any one of those white edges over here. And so he tells his wife, "Oh, basically they don't know what they're doing." And they stayed here. And it so easily could have hit here. I mean, it was gonna hit here.
Yeah.
Idiots. I mean, I'm just, oh my God. I just
So our new WeatherBrains announcer, in the spirit of Rich Fields tonight, James, you call it the primacy bias. Say what you mean by that, and Kim can maybe weigh in on how important that, or is the other word anchoring? Is that the other word I've heard bandied around the last few days? James, talk about that for a second.
I mean, as Kim knows, we're extraordinarily complex when you move past the physical science of issuing a forecast for where this hurricane's going. And people there's a craving for normalcy and the inertia to go with what they want. And if people get a forecast, a snapshot forecast at one point that says center lines here, they're hearing what they want to hear in that reinforces the normalcy of their lives. And I think they're not, we kind of had this pre-show discussion that there's a lack of understanding that weather is a process too. And it's not, you don't just take the snapshot 48 hours in advance just because that helps reinforce the way you feel like you want this thing to happen and ignore everything else. It's tough. And I'll let Kim talk more about that because she's the expert on this. She's the behavior expert. She has 3 kids. I only have 2. She's the behavior expert.
One of them can't talk yet. So that's maybe she's still only 2. You know, as Colin Jost said the other night on Seth Meyers, they're either 1, 5, or 25. You know, you don't have to tell me when they're 15 months and 2 years. Just tell me when they're 1, 5, and 25.
Well, you know, I'll give you the truth on this. I'm not sure why so much focus has come to the idea of anchoring and adjustment. I think we're kind of grasping for a framework to describe completely what is going on with the perceptions people are forming about the threat as it reveals itself, as it unfolds in space and in time. And we have to accept too that the choices people are making aren't just based in single moments. They're actually making a series of decisions over time that also relate to their embodied experiences in the places they live and, you know, with their families and in their workplaces. And, you know, there are a lot of complex dynamics that surround a person in the decisions that they're making. And we need to understand that as much as we understand anything, to really understand the choices that people ultimately are making. I'll highlight that the social science on this, you can think about it as being just as naive in the details as perhaps over 100 years ago when you had some of the first, like the Norwegian cyclone model 150 years ago, even just being conceived of. It was a framework to understand a broad set of observations that people were making about how the atmosphere behaves. And we're doing the same thing in the social sciences still, at a very basic level, trying to understand, gosh, which theoretical perspective from which discipline, communication, psychology, sociology, economics, should we bring to bear to even understand the behavior in this situation? So I just want to take a very quick step back to give us all a real, just really real take on where we are, because I think sometimes there's this pressure that we want to place in the social science to give us some immediate answers. And I appreciate what you were saying, Troy, about the email exchange, not seeing a lot of like optimism from the ideas we were throwing around. I think we have to be really willing to just throw a lot of ideas at the wall and experiment with a lot of stuff. I think that's where I would find my encouragement for our community to look at what we have and just say, there are some there's some well-known problems. Knowing what the problem is doesn't necessarily mean you know what the solution is, and that's okay. But we have to be willing to be brave and stick our necks out and throw out a bunch of ideas and test a bunch of different possible solutions and paths forward, or we're just never going to go anywhere from here.
Hey,
and
Kim,
nowhere from here is where we do not want to go.
Yeah, Kim and Neil, and I apologize because I'm on the MAP email list too. And Neil, you know what that is. Someone earlier today, and I'm not sure, went to the WeatherBrains group, used the cone on one graphic, and immediately below that, Rich, was a beautiful graphic created by WFO Tampa Bay, by the office there, that talked about impacts. There were 4 maps of the CWA. One was hurricane force winds, one was a storm surge, one were tornadoes, and one was heavy rain, flooding rain. And I was most impressed by that. And I'm not sure the rest of y'all saw that. I think it was on the MAP email list. Neil, you may have seen it this afternoon, but that may have been one that kind of put a little bit of a smile on my face. I was very impressed by WFO Tampa during the event, kind of watching what they were doing.
I saw that. That was great. I'll let others comment too. I think there was a lot of innovation going on for ways to put together a lot of the different aspects of what the situation could entail. And that might be the way forward here, is just really thinking about how do we assemble multiple aspects into some kind of storyline that makes sense for people, or a set of storylines.
Well,
Because
what's interesting
this one
to me
thing
is,
doesn't work.
Yeah.
Huh?
One thing that is interesting to me, though, is that innovation almost, Neil, can't come from the Hurricane Center because we're sort of set on the graphics, and it's left. You get that innovation a lot of times at the WFO where the heat is on the stove, and you're having to do that. So I've got to say, good job by Tampa Bay, WFO Tampa.
Yeah, it's a challenge, and I think, I completely agree with Kim. I feel like we need to start sticking our necks out and trying to think of some new out of the box ideas to solve this problem, because it's a little bit of a tricky situation, because when you leave it up to the experts who already know exactly how the cone is calculated and is supposed to be used, and ask them how to do it better, they were like, well, this makes sense to me. We need to bring in people who are not weather experts or know anything about this and say, does this make sense to you? I mean, I want to come back to the conversation about the cone and all alternative ideas to it. But one thing that was interesting about this particular storm, it reminded me a lot of Irma. And it's really, when you have a storm that's approaching a coastline at such a shallow angle, 1 or 2 degrees in shift in track, and you could theoretically be well within the bounds of the cone, is going to change the landfall point way up or down the coast. And I feel like there's probably 2 separate parallel conversations, how to deal with the cone and what's next after the cone. Because I think everyone agrees the cone's got problems. It hasn't improved. The discussion about Charlie was alarming, that nothing's really improved. But then there's this whole other aspect that people look at the cone and treat the storm as if it's a point source. When if you look at the 0 to 6 hour forecast, the cone is so narrow that the eye wall is almost always outside the cone. And the wind field is 100, 200, 300 miles larger than the cone in some cases. And I think a lot of people are like, oh, it's not going to hit me. The center line is almost not, rarely where the worst damage is. It's a lot of times it's to the right of that. And I think people get lured into thinking if you're not in the cone, you're fine, and thinking of a hurricane as a straight line track, and moving away from what are the risks and potential impacts that are well outside of the cone. But going back to the cone and the shallow angle, 1 or 2 wobbles during that eye wall replacement cycle. When it came off of Cuba, a lot of people weren't sure exactly how the topography was going to cause the eye to reform, and is it going to reform a little bit to the east or to the west? All of those tiny little differences, when you're that parallel to the coast, could mean a huge difference in exact landfall point. However, they don't really make a whole lot of difference in impact, because the storm is so wide, it's going to sweep up the coast either way. And I think we get ourselves into trouble when we start focusing on the cone in the center of the track.
And I think
You almost long for those days, Neil, because I remember storms like Frederick and Allen, Andrew, even, I guess maybe by Andrew, I don't know what the situation was, but they didn't release the points. I remember Dr. Frank's advisories during Frederick that said, the storm's going to make landfall tonight, somewhere between Gulfport, Mississippi and Pensacola. And that was as good as it got.
So there was a big discussion, I remember not long ago, about do we release the information for the cone beyond 3 days and go to 5 days? People are like, oh, we want the 5 day. I'm like, God, that's just a lot more uncertainty. You sure you can handle that extra uncertainty? I mean, that's a challenge. And another thing that people weren't really thinking about, to Troy's point about the timing of the landfall, when it's approaching the coast at parallel and it takes a slight shift to the east and it moves that landfall point way down the coast, you're accelerating the time that it actually makes landfall by a lot.
Mm-hmm.
because you're looking at about a third of the length of Florida that it doesn't have to travel before it comes on land. And when people think about the cone, they intuitively think the width of the cone is the uncertainty, but it's actually calculated from a radius of a circle. And if you could think about like the 120-hour forecast, if you correctly predict the exact landfall point perfectly, but say, for example, you're 20 hours too slow, you're still along that radius of air. You might as well be way over here, except you're down here, or maybe you're too fast with it, you're up here. You're still on the edge of that circle. So it's not just a lateral issue that goes into the calculation. I think a lot of people aren't thinking about, you could have a perfect landfall point and still be outside the 67th percentile of the cone air because of timing.
Yeah, that's right. Dr. Kim Cloco McLean, should we do away with the cone?
I get the big loaded question. Only if we can find something that we know is better to replace it with. Because while we can all point to it and how it has some known quirks and foibles, it's not something that is easily replaced, at least at this point. And one of the things that's so interesting about this whole discussion, I agree with you all, that what really is important isn't just the cone and the track that it implies, but all these attributes under it, where the wind field is, how intense it would be, what the time of arrival should be associated with that. But I think we do have to acknowledge the reason why the cone is so powerful is because all of those things hinge on where the thing goes. That's what generates the storyline. There's sort of, okay, if it goes this way, what will create the conditions to make it go that way will lead to this set of things, this earlier time of arrival with maybe this kind of surge in this place. And then like it all goes together as a package of information. But the thing that's tough, and I think one of the reasons that we have a disconnect is because we're not putting that together for people. We kind of leave that all thrown out to the winds, where it's like we're ripping chapters out of a book, throwing the pages at people and saying, here, go assemble the story. And, sure, you can make this make sense for yourselves. And who in the world, in the public, even in some of our expert end user communities, understands that the storm surge graphic being a reasonable worst case scenario isn't even necessarily tied to the best guess track line. Those are two different scenarios that could play out to create those things. They're not designed to play together. Same for the earliest reasonable time of arrival of tropical storm force winds. That could be a scenario like what Neil was saying, that would happen if the storm took a different track and then hit land, or if it accelerated. Like there's a lot of things that can happen to make that occur that don't necessarily tell the same story as that best guess track line and the envelope that's drawn around it based on historic error. So we don't even think about this, but all of our little slices of the forecast future, we're putting out completely disassembled. It's like we want to make a car and we give people a bunch of parts and we're really frustrated that they can't drive it off the lot. Like, what's wrong with you people? Why can't you drive this set of parts off of the lot? Why are you so stupid? I do not know how to put together a car. You would not trust me to put together anything. In fact, my children don't. Anything that's broken in the house, they just go to dad. Dad's the one who fixes all the things. We should not put that burden on our publics. That's the only thing I really hold on to about improving, is that we're looking, maybe we're asking the wrong question. It's not, should we toss out the cone? It's, how can we think about telling a better story? The cone is just one piece of it. And we're putting every time these conversations come up, people are like, well, what single perfect product can we create to make this all perfect? Yeah. There's not going to be a single perfect product. What we should really focus on is there being a perfect process for talking about what could occur. It's not that we can't allow these products to do all the work. They don't do all the work. The most important work is done by people like our guest, by Rich.
Right. That's what I wanted to ask Rich.
A and S.
How did as my grandmother called me a weather prophet when I was a kid. She said I was going to be a weather prophet. It's our job as the weather prophet to interpret all this information, all those different graphics from the Hurricane Center. I know you were showing those, and I know they were showing them in the Fort Myers market. I'm reminded of the Johnny Cash song. He stole the car out of the plant in Detroit one piece at a time. You know, he had a 60, he had a 56, 57, 58, 59, 60, 61, you know, all the years. Cadillac when it was all over with. Kim's exactly right. We expect them to put the Cadillac together. Rich,
Well,
how did we do? How did the weather prophets do?
You know, all in all, great. I think that something Kim was talking about, I don't know if the word is complacency or what, but you know, people, they watch the forecasters on the air, they watch a meteorologist on the air and explaining all these different vagaries of a storm. And so let's say we start talking about the right front quadrant, you know, or that being the worst part of the storm. And then, you know, people literally, like I've been hearing it now a couple of days later. Oh, well, you guys, even when it was coming into Tampa Bay, you said we were going to be on the backside of the storm. And I was like, what do you mean? A direct hit to Tampa Bay is going to be a direct hit to Tampa Bay. I mean, the whole place is going to get wiped out, guys, not just the right front quadrant. I mean, so you kind of got to really you want to inform, you want to kind of teach people about the genesis of the storm and its propagation and so on and so forth. But how much do you tell them that gets to the point where now they think they know better something else about the storm? You know, oh, I'm going to be on the backside, or the winds aren't going to be bad over here. There's not going to be tornadoes over here. Oh my gosh. I mean,
well, I got to think sometimes, Rich, and I promise I'm not quit butting in here, but you know, Rick, we spend time, you spend time as a WCM and everyone here and Rich and James, we spend time talking to people about this inexact science of weather forecasting. And that we're not always going to be right, that we're really pretty good where we are. And it almost seems when it comes down to hurricanes, they want it, like Kim said, perfect. They expect it to be perfect. We already know it's an inexact science. It's not going to be perfect. Are we good at what we do? I think the field is good at what it does. But I kind of get this feeling everyone expects us to be perfect with this aspect of weather forecasting.
I think weather forecasting in general, but yes, especially with something as serious as a storm like this.
Yeah.
I think with technology and just the disciplines of youth today, I think they expect it to be right on.
Yep.
And something we preached every single day, you know, even as the cone got smaller and smaller and smaller, and we started to hone in on, we kept saying, anything can happen here. This still isn't set in stone. I mean, you just keep trying to throw that out, not as a CYA, but just to keep people, you know, informed and prepared. Anything can happen. And if you look at that track, man, blow it up. It jogs and jigs and jags. Oh my God, it doesn't come sweeping in so pretty and nicely like folks watching TV think it's gonna. It just doesn't do that. And this was a great example of you know, one system off to the north, you know, and you know, just making a huge difference.
You know, this conversation is so interesting. From the social science research we do have related to this problem, I think you guys might be surprised to learn that the public, which I know is a really vast array of people, but even when you look across many different kinds of demographic groups, age groups, something that we consistently see in our experimental research is that people infer uncertainty into forecast information. So if you say, you know, the high today in beautiful Tampa is 75 degrees, they know it's not going to be 75 degrees. And they infer some range of bounds around that. The thing that's really interesting about this problem is that, okay, first of all, they know our game a little bit. They have some sense of what forecasting is. And they know that we don't live in a deterministic, like a perfectly deterministic world. But we're not giving them a lot of information about just how much uncertainty they should infer. So there's some days where, yeah, you can give them a 1 degree guarantee. You know what the temperature is going to be. It's easy. There's some days where the timing of the front, you know, is it going to be in the forecast period or not? It could be off by 25 degrees, depending on how you do your measuring for what the temperature is in a given period. And if we don't tell people what the envelope of uncertainty looks like for the exact event, we're not helping them to do that process naturally. So one of the things that's so interesting about this conversation is I think what we're seeing is people are inferring uncertainty into that that forecast. They're doing it because I don't think they completely understand the cone and what it's meant to convey. We know that they don't. So what they're doing is they're making inferences based on other kinds of things. They're making inferences based on, previous history. Think about Tampa. The people of Tampa, there's this really popular idea in Tampa that you can't get hit because it hasn't happened. And every single one of these storms that's come by where they're, forecasted to get hit, then they don't get hit. It reinforces this local folk perception that they can't get hit. And they come up with this whole folk science about why that is. That even happens here. I mean, I've measured it in Norman. The people in
Joplin, Missouri.
Yeah.
Missouri, and the tornado there. It's up on a plateau. Tornadoes never coming through here.
Exactly. There are, there's really interesting local folklore that does emerge surrounding these observations. People are really observant. They just don't see things with the same framework that we do because they're looking from the ground up and we're looking from the sky down. And that makes all the difference in how you're going to interpret what's gone on. So I think it's worth us recognizing that the process people are undertaking is one where I don't think they really buy that it's this exact one scenario, but they don't know how else to make a judgment then. And how off will it be and why, and what are the potential futures here? So with that, I'll toss it. I just thought you guys would find that really interesting. And I think Neil has the next question.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right. We're looking at this from the top down, and I think going back to your car mechanic analogy, it's literally like asking a bunch of mechanics if the parts make sense. I mean, of course they're going to say yes, and that's the trouble when you ask a bunch of meteorologists if this stuff makes sense. Of course it makes sense to them, but it doesn't make sense to the rest of the world. And it's been interesting to me to see how much disagreement and confusion there is even among people with PhDs in statistics and math and meteorology about how you calculate the cone and what, the probability density function versus percentile versus probability of impacts, or there's at least 3 or 4 different probabilities in there that are not often even correlated with each other. So I totally agree. I'm not a fan of the cone, but to Kim's point, unless we can come up with a scientifically rigorous, better way to do it that we've tested or at least experimented somehow. I don't know exactly, Kim, how you would do field experiments with testing these in a real world environment, because that would almost make me a little nervous. But I feel like we've got to come up with something better. This has been the same thing for too long without any improvement other than people trying to figure out how to explain it or message it better. I don't think it's a messaging problem. I think it's just the graphic and people associating with what they think the graphic means. And I don't think you're going to get people off of that. So we'll see. I mean, I really hope somebody can come up with something better, but unless it works at a minimum as good for every case, and in some cases better, that's what we got to do. What I worry about is we come up with a solution that works really good for some of these cases that we're just talking about, but then it actually is counterproductive or worse for other situations, and then we haven't really improved the overall situation that we're in, because it may work in some places and not others. I mean, this was a discussion that we had about using the ensemble spread for cone width. It certainly works if there's spread but general agreement. But if there's wild different agreement with different camps of ensembles, then you're all over the place.
I think Dr. Jacobs brings up a great point. Each storm is different. Each impact zone is different. And I was going to ask Kim, we talk a lot about the cone not working, but back to humans being very complicated people, very complicated creatures. Maybe the cone works great for some, and spaghetti plot works great for some. I mean, you look at where Ian hit, and it's kind of the great melting pot. You've got the incredible range of socioeconomic scale. You've got just people not from Florida. You've got people not from the United States. So I don't know that there's one right answer to go toward. Do we need to have multiple right answers? I don't know.
That's a beautiful
So Kim,
question.
you should jump in on that because you shared Tomer Berg's fabulous graphic that told the story better than any other explainer I had seen up to that point. It's exactly what I was thinking and communicating to my people in Florida. There was one graphic that did it right there. But
Mhm.
then Dr. Jacobs counters, how do you make a binary decision about evacuation, out of a multiple scenario deal?
I so I saw that email, and snarkily my first typed out response was welcome to decision science. I mean, this is what we do every day. We choose among alternatives, and when risk is what the name of the game, we're often confronted with multiple possible kinds of risks. I mean, even just look at the tornado sheltering decision or hurricane sheltering decision. People have to contend with the risk presented by the hurricane, the probability times consequence of that, versus, say, if they leave a business, will it be plundered if they're not there to protect it? And they're competing kinds of alternatives that people choose among all the time. And so we think about this as a really complex decision, when in reality it's the kind of decision that people are confronted with a lot. Just think of how many people do sports betting. Like we don't give people enough credit for being able to pick up on concepts related to uncertainty and consequences. And it's just all about how you present that information in a way that they can digest it. And our literature suggests in especially psychology and risk decision science, that if you present that information in a way that people can understand what those uncertainties are, they'll trust it more and they'll be more likely to take an action. Even though it's a deterministic action and they might face consequences they don't like, they know that you did the best thing you could. What really makes them upset is if they get overly deterministic information, they make a choice, they incur a loss, and then they're pissed off because they never knew that there was uncertainty to begin with. So, I think that we need to give people a little bit more credit. But to James, to your question about that, some things working for some people and some working, differently for others, that's a great point. It's not going to be a one size fits all perfect. And that's why we have a thriving communication ecosystem of people who are giving information in different ways. Some people like how broadcasters are presenting it. Some people like worst case scenarios. Like there are people who gravitate toward different kinds of things. And I think we need to make a broad array of offerings, but at least help them all to come to a center point where there's a set of, a way of communicating about these future outcomes that makes sense. It was even hard for me to follow. And maybe this was a good test case, humbling for me as a mother of a newborn, trying to follow this. And I wanted to stay on top of it. It was a really big event. I even was messaging about Tampa, that day before. I got caught up in that. I'll be very honest. And, I think it was hard not to. And after the event happened, I just thought, why did I do that? Like in the back of my head, I knew that there was this range that was possible, but the trend was just, so compelling. And so it's not even just about making, choices based on the information of a single point in time. And, it's sort of looking at a trend over time. There's a lot that goes into it. I'm interested, Rich, you lived through this. You have this really interesting perspective on how the event unfolded. Something that James just brought up is there isn't just one kind of population. Can you tell us about the people who live in this area? What are the demographics that span between Fort Myers up through Tampa? And, when you're doing messaging, what are you thinking about? Who are you trying to message to in this event? Who are you trying to reach? Any kind of population specifically you had in mind?
And you're muted, Rich. So take it off mute there. Yeah.
So when you're talking about the population and the makeup of it, I mean, it goes from the mega wealthy living along the beaches all up and down the coast. I mean, it's like Miami, Fort Lauderdale over here on the Gulf Coast. It's exactly that. You've got ball players with $12 million mansions, just down the street. And then you go inland a couple of miles and you got places like, Pinellas Park and some of these inland areas. And these are the lower income, certainly the median low income across the United States. That's what these people are. And so economically, it's a huge array of different kinds of people to talk to. And then, I do Facebook. I'm on Facebook Live 5 days a week. And it's interesting. I think, Kim, you started answering your question. You said, maybe some people react to a spaghetti plot differently, or some people react to a cone differently. And I remember, I think it was Sunday or Monday, storm hasn't really, things haven't really solidified yet on anything really. And so I'm on Facebook Live talking, and I'm watching the chat, people are writing questions and stuff. And somebody actually chimed in and said, oh, I saw the latest scribblings. I guess they were talking about the spaghetti plots. I saw the latest scribblings, and you guys don't know where this is going. So ... And so I thought to myself, I didn't know how to answer this guy back, but he was literally saying, I'm going to take this into my own hands. I'm going to use my own powers of, to deduce and reason, and I'm going to make the decision, because those lines, you guys don't even know. Well, we're trying to tell everybody we don't know. These are all possibilities. These are many, many runs. These are models. You got the Euro, you got the GFF. I mean, you try to explain that, but I don't know if it goes over their heads. I'm just not sure. But in the case of Charlotte County, Lee County, places down south, Fort Myers, Punta Gorda, I think that was a matter of not getting the word out early enough for those folks. The way things change so quickly, I don't know if there is a certain way you could have broadcasted a message to those folks. Number one, we already spoke about it. I think it was dark hours when all this was really solidifying and coming to fruition. So, people are waking up and they're going about their regular morning routine down there, or thinking about waking up, and they're not getting the right information at the right time. And I don't know, man. When you're on the air, you're trying to be every man. You're trying to talk to everybody and relate to everybody. It's difficult. I mean, it can be very difficult. I just got to flash back to that, to the neighbors saying, "Oh, well, we weren't on the right side. We weren't on the right front side of the storm. What? Like, how do you explain it any differently? I mean,
and Rich, I was shocked at what Rick Smith and Dr. Coco McLean shared about the high concentration of manufactured housing in those three counties there. I think I was kind of shocked about that. That kind of caught me off guard.
A lot of folks living like that here in Florida. People make a lot of jokes about Florida, and you see a lot of crazy stuff on TV, and it ends up being the guy from Florida. I mean, that's kind of where we live here. Anything inland is going to be the lower income housing, whether it be manufactured mobile homes, whatever it is. But yeah, that's what we have. That's the makeup here.
Hey, Rick, I've got a question for you, just because this, and you don't deal with it in your area, but in the hurricane products, are there any of the hurricane products that trigger WEA on the cell phones?
The extreme wind warning does.
Yeah. Oh, it does? Okay. I forgot about that one.
But it came out late, I thought. I mean, I'm not criticizing the Weather Service in Tampa, but I thought it was out a little bit late, relatively, because you knew the eye wall was coming inland there. I don't know that it really mattered. I remembered getting it during Hurricane Harvey and thinking it was perfect from the Weather Service in Corpus. But, that product.
But Bill, if that came out when it came out, and you're right, I saw that EWW when it first came out, and the eye wall was already on the south part of Sanibel Island. So it was there, but I guess that's the only product really, other than any attendant tornado warnings and flash flood warning that would trigger WEA. Because I'm looking back, Rich, and kind of thinking here that, I need something to wake these people up in Fort Myers and to tell them, hey, guess what? Something's happened in the last 10 hours since you've been asleep. And I guess there's nothing.
The EWW is too late for that.
Yeah.
We had gone through a number of, I won't say false alerts, but, every county put out their own to test. The National Weather Service put one out. And I don't know about the case for the folks down in Charlotte County and down south of us, but you know, we were inundated with our phones were going off all the time. We'd be on the air and they'd be going off. So, and this is, you know, a day before the storm even. And so I think people might have even disregarded some of that.
I'm wondering. Yeah, I agree with you.
Just saying. There was almost too many
much.
of us.
James, I think you had a really important question a minute ago that related back to the emergency management community. Ask that question.
Yeah, I don't know how important it was in this conversation, but Rich's point there is true. People are getting peppered with layers and layers of messaging from local and state and county and National Hurricane Center, and even if they want to, they can get information from federal agencies too, like FEMA. And I think just that can be very ambiguous to people, and that's never good in messaging either. Now, my original point was back to Kim when we're talking about testing messaging for effectiveness. I mean, that's very sophisticated science now. That's really advanced, where, like she said, where we are in social science, it's a very young behavioral type science, but boy, testing has gotten so much more sophisticated for this sort of stuff. We can know what works.
You had a point.
Yeah, I'm gonna shift the track here just a little bit. It'll be just a wobble. So, sorry,
So to speak.
But Rich, I'm curious. Right before the show, we were talking about, and everybody was talking about before this hurricane, the similarities between Ian and Charlie, and it's uncanny the similarities, the landfall spot, the time. But one of the big differences was the size and the impacts of the storm. And I'm just curious, from a messaging standpoint, we see this not only with hurricanes, but we see it with severe weather days. We see it with winter storms. This idea that people rationalize their decisions based on the fact that they've been through this before. I was in Charlie. I was in storm name here, and nothing bad happened. So that means I'm okay. And we see time and time again, that mentioned in interviews, and time again, people get in trouble because of that. I think I know the answer, but how do you message that, Rich? How do you try to convince people that it doesn't matter what you've been through before? This is completely different.
Yeah, hindsight's 2020, and certainly with the next storm. I mean, you guys, first of all, we had just gone through 3 months of our rainy season, so the ground's already saturated and there's nowhere for this water to go. So we started getting river flood. The phone started going off for river flooding, and then ahead of the storm, we started getting aerial flood warnings, and then wind warnings, and then all these warnings started coming down. This is after the tests, after everybody's individual tests that you just went through a second ago. Other than making the big hurricane a different sound, a different tone, a different something, I don't know. I think they're kind of getting complacent with all this thing going. I mean, it got to the point where you just hit the button. You didn't even look at it anymore. You know what I mean?
Well, I'm taken back to 1975 and Hurricane Eloise. I'm taken back to 1994 and Hurricane Opal. And they literally had to get the police cars and the emergency vehicles and the sirens because they were middle of the night, rapid intensification or track shifts. And they literally had to ride around the neighborhoods because they didn't have WEA and apps and all these, live coverage things that we do now. And I those things always make the hair stand up on the back of my neck. When we were, 27 years ago, we were having to drive around with police cars to let people know in the middle of the night that something had changed. It was that fundamental. And that's just, really amazing. So yeah, James, say what you're going to say. Bash me.
No, when you said what'd you say, 1970 what? 5?
1975, Eloise.
Okay.
Yeah.
My grandma would always say on those old dates, the year of our Lord, 1900 and something.
And well, like they said about the Clemson NC State game this weekend, they said Grandma said, North Carolina State won the ACC in 1931, and they said, "Yeah, Grandma, go back to sleep." So, yeah, at the risk of sounding like Grandma, you got to do whatever you got to do to get that information out there. It happened with Opal on the night of O.J. Simpson's verdict. We were laughing about O.J. earlier, James, but we couldn't get any coverage. The front pages of the newspapers along the Central Gulf Coast, had Opal relegated to the lower part of the newspaper that day, and it nearly became a Category 5 hurricane overnight.
Rick, you were talking about similarities and differences in Charlie and Ian, and one of the big differences here, I think, was the surge. I think Charlie was 3, maybe 4 foot, and Ian was some 9+. There's a video of the chief from Wink in Fort Myers, I believe it is, someplace south of me. And have you seen all this? Have you all seen this video I'm talking about already?
Yep.
I mean, just amazing. And he's like, let me show you. And the water was like coming up. He's like, they lost their entire first floor. Wink lost their entire first floor. They weren't prepared for it.
Well, I think it really hit home to me with the Severe Studios video that I just happened to have up and was playing on the Weather Channel about at Fort Myers Beach, where it was obviously out of control by 11 o'clock. And that surge was coming in fast. And that camera was 6 or 9 feet and it was going underwater. And I was like, this is bad. So it's an upside down world, as Kim said right there, for sure. Rick Smith, one more point, then back to Neil.
Things get popping into my head as far as, this is so complicated. And like somebody mentioned, we had this whole email thread all over the weekend, which I struggled to keep up with because you guys are so smart. And I don't know how you type so fast, Kim, with a little baby in your mouth. It's amazing stuff. I've learned so much, but it is kind of depressing. It is kind of discouraging. And another thing to add on to the pile is we heard, the storm surge forecast, the numbers, you're going to get this much storm surge. Well, the very scattered measurements that are out there of storm surge in the immediate aftermath of the storm are nowhere near what the final numbers are probably going to be like after the survey. But now people have that in their heads. Now they've added that to their database of, well, they said it was going to be 15 feet, but the Weather Channel said the next morning it was only 8 feet. So they don't know what they're talking about. While they're out there surveying right now, and they're going to measure probably higher amounts in some places than were forecast. It's not a question. It's just another thing that's a complicating factor. People are getting information. Information is so available now, which is good, but it's also bad because people are developing opinions for the next storm now based on really faulty information.
Well, we got a reputation as a trusted source for a friend in Milton during Hurricane Sally. She called my wife and said, "Hey, we're hearing all this conflicting information. Should we evacuate? We're in Milton." I'm going to one place, and that's a set of maps that the Hurricane Center puts out about surge. It's going to be Dr. Jacobs' pick tonight. I'm going to find their house on that map and say, here's what the water's potentially going to be above dry ground. 10% chance, you take that as you say, but this is worst case and you better prepare for it. And they acted on it. They got out of there and they got it. They had the exact thing we said. And so they were on the phone Saturday night going, hey, the models are saying this is coming here. What do we do? And, I had clear messaging as I'd followed all along. If the storm gets up there this year, but still, let's, keep a really close eye on it, stay in touch. Keep that worst case scenario in mind. It's, really important. Rick, did I steal the show from you again, or did you get your point?
I am good. Thank you, sir.
Who wanted to go next? I know, Rich, you don't have to leave, do you? I know you had an expiration date.
No, I'm good. Go ahead.
Okay, so let's, keep going as long as we can. Who wants to go next?
I'll jump in here and sort of continue on this thread about the storm surge stuff. It was interesting to me to see this debate, and I've seen photos coming out of the area where you are going to see some shockingly high reports. I mean, high water marks inside very tall houses.
There's boats on top of 2-story houses. How
Yeah.
does that happen?
But
That's-
what the crazy thing to me is you get these people that are like, well, they said the storm surge was going to be 18 feet, but it turned out it was only 8 or 10 feet. But they live in a house that's 5 feet above sea level.
Right.
And I'm thinking, once you pass a certain point, how much further past that point you go is kind of irrelevant. Like, it's time to leave. And I feel like, when you look at my pick of the week, when you look at the storm surge inundation mapping, some of these areas in Lee County they have inundation that comes further in horizontally from a category 1 than Tampa is going to get in a category 5, just because the coastline is so flat.
Yeah.
And I feel like people don't think about like horizontal spatial concept. When you raise something an inch laterally, how far it goes. I mean, and we're just talking an inch, not like 20 feet. But I going back to a question I had earlier about the cone, and Kim or whoever, please come back to this if you want. Is this an opportunity are we coming off this event where people's like threat perception of the cone is all of a sudden recalibrated? Are they like, oh, now I get it. Now this is the changing moment where all of a sudden I realize that the cone means this and not this? Or, what I'm worried about is, do we lose anything if all of a sudden people start to catch on to what the cone means, and then next season or the season after that, we just totally are like, oh no, here, we're going to do something totally new. Check this out.
Or they get it and it's 18 years before the next major threat comes, so they eventually forget it.
I mean, to sort of like counter my own argument, I'm sitting here thinking, well, if I look at the conversation after Charlie, clearly nothing has changed. So maybe we're just wasting our time thinking this will be like the watershed moment.
I don't know if I'm sure other people will chime in on this. I had the same thought. This is a reenactment of 2004, so with the exact same place and population. I don't know what we stand to lose. I think what you're seeing come out is a lot of people who are carrying away some impression that the forecast was wrong. And what we're trying to say is that what we have here is a failure to communicate. But they're learning something. They have learned something. I almost guarantee you what they are learning is not the technical definition of the cone. So I think we are probably well situated to do whatever we want to do unencumbered by that particular concern. I think the way that the Weather Service, when they were doing the hazard simplification project in the early days, and we were thinking about watch warning advisory system redesign, I was helping that program to think through how it is that we could evaluate, what alternate options there could be, and what the trade-offs could be in making a change. One of the things that we thought about was how embedded is this, each of those products in the various systems of our country, for especially public safety, but beyond. And there was a study undertaken of the institutionalization, how deeply embedded in our society are warnings, watches, and advisories. That's one of the reasons the advisory went, is because almost nobody uses it for anything. Warnings are very deeply embedded in all kinds of formal law, policies, and practices. So it became very obvious that to change that would be an enormous burden on society. Just to change a word for the sake of trying to make something that's conversationally easier than the watch warning distinction just didn't seem all that worth it, especially when the things we tested weren't more naturally understandable than alternatives. With the cone, this is something that would be interesting to understand. How are decisions made based on the cone? I think we have to be realistic that, we saw in this event, people had published emergency operations plans that they did not follow. And why was that? It'd be really interesting to learn why, and to document, okay, here's the extent to which these things are embedded. And then the extent to which in an event like this, they weren't really even used, you know, to the policy, and think about, is this thing even really that, does it draw on that much attachment, or is it something people use because they have to? It's the only thing they've got. There's a lot of room here for interesting studies to address that question about, you know, what do we stand to gain if we make a change, and what do we stand to lose? What are those trade-offs?
You silenced the crowd, Kim.
I did. I didn't know if anybody else had any comments on that. You know, there might be people who are sitting here going, "Nah, chuck it, set it on fire." There are a lot of people who want to set this thing on fire, and I appreciate them. I am also frustrated by the way that this is done, but it is tough. It is very tough. I do appreciate that it is difficult. So I don't know if anybody else on the panel had other thoughts, but I do encourage us to think about, anytime we want to set something on fire and make it go away, we need to think about what the trade-offs are. You know, do we have a better replacement? What kinds of, you know, negatives might be experienced if something goes away? And do know too, I mean, that's something for the watch warning advisory system. It's something that gets, I think, equal ire. People are just like, why can't we just throw this away and set it on fire? Well, there have been some people who've put some thought into that, and I think it's worth people knowing that.
I think it's a no-lose situation, in my opinion. I think that this is ripe for a lot of new ideas and experiments. And you know, if we end up right back where we started and decided that everything we tried is going to make it worse, then that's fine. But just sticking with the status quo because we have, it is not, to me, that doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, as a scientist, I've looked at a lot of these recent proposals on how you'd calculate things differently. And, you know, I try to poke holes in stuff. I try to falsify stuff. And if I can, that's not necessarily a bad thing, but at some point, someone's going to come up with an idea that no one can poke any holes in, and it's going to be a better solution.
Dr. Jacobs, you took issue with some of CNN's coverage after the hurricane. Talk about what set you off about that, because I didn't get to see it.
Well, I mean, the thing is, I mean, everyone knows the climate is changing and that there's probably some sort of influence on the modulation of heat content and things like that. But when you've got a storm that's a day or two or potentially less from making landfall, starting to just turn this into a debate about climate change, which isn't going to get solved in the next 48 hours, is just not the right take. And my concern there is that when you sort of politicize this, 50% of the people with their televisions turned on turn it off. And then they're not getting the information that they actually need, which is, you need to take action. We'll worry about climate change next week, but for the next 48 hours, you got to worry about this storm. And I think that that's the point that a lot of folks in the Weather Service and in the Hurricane Center were trying to make, was that no one's saying that this isn't happening or it's not an issue, but let's focus on the storm. And we can discuss the long-term impacts next week or next month or next year. But my concern was just anytime you politicize this in the heat of the moment, you piss people off, you alienate viewers, you cause people to stop listening. And when they stop taking in useful information, then that's only bad things happen at that point. It just wasn't, it's not the wrong conversation. It was the wrong time.
Exactly. We saw the same thing with the pandemic.
Yeah. And we saw a lot of, conspiracy theories. We were, laughing last Monday night about our friend Cat Turd and his, comments about this, they're just not telling us where it's going to go or how strong it's going to be at landfall, which is just, patently ridiculous. It's points on a forecast, and how you present them is a critical thing. But, he turned it into, they didn't want the people to have the information, which makes no sense at all. lots of issues here, but now, going back and thinking about that, I saw that happening in real time, Dr. Jacobs, when people were attacking Jamie Rome, and I thought this is absolutely the wrong time for that to be happening.
And I
that
thought
stuff out.
He handled it absolutely perfectly. I mean, it was the most professional way to handle that situation, and it was just, let's just redirect the focus back to the event that we're worried about, which is a major landfalling hurricane, and whether there's some attribution to anthropogenic global warming or not, we can worry about that later. But right now we've got a potential, high category 4 making landfall. People aren't following evacuation orders. That's the top priority for the next 12 to 48 hours.
It's not convenient for him. James, you said in the discussion here that, people think it's enormously expensive for themselves. It's inconvenient, and they kind of talk themselves out of it because of so many times of dodging a bullet. So they just talk themselves right out of it.
Rich, I'm so interested, following on from this event. It had been so interesting sitting in Tampa, watching it unfold, and frustrating, and a whole host of emotions. And I can only imagine how you feel living down there and having gone through this. I'm interested in going forward. If we have another hurricane this season that threatens that same coast, how do you think you might take the lessons learned from this event, if at all, and try to do something differently through the rest of the season?
I mean, other than waving my arms on TV saying, hey, pay attention, this is really important this time. Hey. I mean, I don't know how else the information could be disseminated any different, any better. We constantly said that, it's the cone of uncertainty. I mean, that's the name of it. I mean, it's all uncertain, folks. These are the probabilities, but it's uncertain. And golly, I guess just to try to remind them that anything could happen in lickety split time, in 10, 11 hours, anything can happen that completely change the course of the storm and the course of history for a neighborhood. So, this one, I think this one kind of did wake up a lot of people, at least the people that I'm in touch with, or the people that I have the ability to connect with socially online and stuff like that. I think a lot of people learned a lot from this one about just the way it moved down the Florida coast. Just all of a sudden, it was like I said earlier, it was the Panhandle, then it was the Nature Coast, then it was Tampa Bay. And I mean, I think I would remind them of that, depending on where the cone and spaghetti plots, what they say next time. I think I would just remind them, hey, guys, remember when the last one, this was going to go to the Panhandle possibly, and it goes all the way down to Fort Myers. Anything can happen. If you're in a hurricane warning area, my God, you got the chance of a hurricane coming your way. So anywhere in that hurricane warning area, I would just, I don't know if I said it here before the show started. I don't know if I said it in an email, but I will never. I mean, I'm a grown man now. I probably always would evacuate, but as a kid, it was a different thought. Now, after this storm, I would never not evacuate again. I live on the beach. I grew up on the beach. I would never not evacuate again. This one was crazy. It was just nuts to try to follow.
A quick follow-up for you. Living down there, you have a much better sense of this than any of us do. Decision making for individuals in this event could have been about their personal choices and weighing the risks for themselves. It could also have been about how society was as a whole making choices. So if you have workplaces that are shutting down, schools that are shutting down, and all hinging on perhaps emergency managers making these calls about evacuations, and all of those organizational practices that can help people to make those decisions because they don't have to worry about XYZ, right? Or they have different kinds of assistance available, all of that. If you were to look back on this event and try to pinpoint where you thought some of the failure points were, in your estimation, do you think that it's on the individuals making the choice just not to go because they didn't believe it? Do you think that there were organizational challenges, delays that hampered the process? All of the above? Where do you place the most difficult sticky points?
We're still looking into 2 counties and when officials gave evacuation orders. It appears they were late. And I think we all talked about why. It was in the overnight hours. And I don't think word got out in time. But I don't know if that's official or not. So we're looking into, we have calls from the television station into the folks that made those decisions. And we're going to find out exactly when that happened. But yeah, number one on that level, maybe not getting word out quick enough that the course had changed and it's solidified. And now it looks like it's south of Tampa Bay, folks. Here it comes, number one there on the city fathers, mothers side. And then 2 on complacency of the public. They're inundated days before this happens with all kinds of information from various places, social media, the radio, the TV, all these places. And it gets kind of numbing. And especially if you've been through a couple of storms, I forget who said it earlier, I rode Charlie out. You know what I mean? Oh, there ain't nothing worse than that. Well, yeah, there are. And when it hits your neighborhood, it's really bad. So, yeah, I mean, I don't know about blame, but certainly there was a lot of little meltdowns in a lot of little places. And it is totally, it's like a bomb went off down there, you guys. I mean, it's total devastation. This is going to take years. I mean, years. Sanibel Causeway alone. I mean, they've got the Army Corps of Engineers down there. These guys, they're out in jungles putting up bridges so that tanks can get across them, to fight. That's what they're doing. Our Army Corps of Engineers is down there putting up makeshift bridges just so you can get out to your island again, out to your beach, where your home was. And there's not many standing at all. Any of them that had cinder block first floors, okay, that cinder block first floors there, but it's gutted. Everything else is gone. There's nothing in it. It's just the cinder block 3 walls, maybe 4. But I don't know. I don't know where the breakdowns were. If there was a breakdown, I think complacency somehow, and it could have been a couple of things. It could have been too much news about it. It could have been too many warnings ahead of time about it. It could have been, hey, I've ridden these out before. I was on Charlie, but I was on the front side of the storm. I mean, there's just so many things. I mean, it's like human nature. They want to make up their own mind. They want to deduce this out for themselves and make the most convenient plot for their life and their comfortability.
I think there are lots of jarring thoughts from this storm. For me, how the left side of the storm, the wind seemed to be substantially a bigger problem than it was on the right side, which I assume has something to do with the pressure gradient and
the rainfall. The rainfall was crazy on that side.
And so that kind of shocked me. And I know, I always go back and I refer to these storms because I've been following them since Camille, but I think there's a lesson in each one of them. And I remember on Wednesday morning looking at my wife and saying, this is Hurricane Charlie all over again. I didn't have anybody to communicate that to outside of, my people in Tampa and Orlando, and they didn't really care about that. But, it really was Charlie again. And I'm kind of shocked. Is it impossible to get a big storm surge in Punta Gorda, Rich? Is it just because of the way the bay is aligned? It just seemed like the surge never really got there. It's always the wind at Punta Gorda.
Exactly. With the outer barrier islands and so forth. Like, let's say it came into Tampa Bay, and so it's coming up the state of Florida, and you got Tampa Bay off to the right. It starts pushing that water. Once it gets, there's nowhere for that water to go in Tampa Bay. And we were looking at early projections from that very same storm surge map that was showing Pinellas County literally being cut off from Hillsborough County with the storm surge 9+ feet because of all the water pushing up to the north end of Tampa Bay, Oldsmar Bay, I believe they call it. And so the maps were already saying that literally Pinellas County was going to be underwater up there, northern Hillsborough, northern Pinellas County, just kind of cut off. And so when it finally hit down south of us, there were no real big basins like that. The islands just let it flow in and out kind of much more easily. And I think that helped a lot.
Well, my jarring thought from Hurricane Charlie was that I think it was the Holiday Inn or the Hampton Inn in Punta Gorda, because I'm, in hotels all the time, lost the top floor. And, there were people that, could have been in that, and that really has influenced me since that day in my messaging, to hotel operators. That storm literally took the top off of that hotel. And that's a reason to not have people there, because suddenly you're putting first responders at risk, not to mention the people in the hotel, giving them a false sense of security, that they were in a safe place. And that's a really critical message for me. Rick Smith, any jarring thoughts before we go to the recorded segments?
I have a lot, probably. Just thinking, the big story today was the death toll rising, and we do anticipate that to continue to rise. I don't think there's still places that they haven't even really been able to search yet. So
Right.
it's just mind-boggling. Yep, Rich. What'd you say?
They just can't even get to these places. You're right.
Right.
There's a lot of places they haven't been to.
Yeah, I saw today on I think NBC Nightly News, they got to a place that they hadn't been to before. Anyway, so we don't know how that's going to end up. But just thinking of the loss of life, and it's just, Rich, you said it at the top of the show. You just don't know what it's like unless you're walking around on the ground, and it's hard to even watch the news and watch the coverage just seeing that. But I just can't even imagine that. So, just feel for the people. I mean, we're in all these storms, and we geek out on them as meteorologists and scientists, but this is the bad side of this.
Mm-hmm. Troy, anything you want to add from an observation standpoint?
No, I just I'm saddened by it all. I mean, it in ways it just seems like we do this and then we turn around and do it again. But again, as we pointed out, I mean, there's only so much that Rich can do on TV. People have to have individual responsibility. Now, nowadays, they may be telling you don't. I won't get off in politics, but I'm telling you, there is individual responsibility. You can't expect to have an emergency manager come to your door and say, okay, it's time for us to go. I'm going to hold your hand. We're going to go all the way, and I'm going to get you to a safe place. It does not happen. And that's what worries me, Rich, about what we probably are yet to see out on Sanibel, on that island, because I had some friends that were out there and they were totally surprised. Retirement house. They fortunately had a home that was certified to 150 miles an hour. Of course, 150 miles an hour does not say it's certified against the water. It doesn't say it's certified against the house, by the way, Rich, which floated by. They had a picture of that floated by in the storm surge. If that hit that house, and it didn't, they survived, but the pictures are just amazing. And I'm afraid we don't know yet the totality of that island.
Yeah.
Sad.
Dr. Neil Jacobs, anything you want to add?
The thing that really sort of I found most upsetting was how much hype and glamorization there was on social media about people riding this storm out like it was going to be some kind of party. I think people, they take nature for granted. And, I hate to say it, I've got this really sick feeling that a lot of those people aren't going to be posting anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
that's right. Dr. Cloco McLean.
I think I'll just give a moment of humility. Following it as I was as close to member of ordinary public as I'm going to get. And I found it tough to follow. it was really
Mhm.
tough to follow what exactly was going on. I didn't know day to day what was a responsible thing for me to be messaging to people. I really feel for those of you like you, Rich, who were, you know, in the middle of this firestorm trying to find the right thing to say when you were amid a forecast that was so variable and subject to change. Sometimes we have these events and things are fairly consistent day to day, and this was not that kind of an event. And man, everything from social media putting forward things that are old, you know, makes it tough to assemble, and people saying different things and believing different things. And as an ordinary person in Florida, if you're trying to navigate all of that and figure out, well, here's what this person believes, and here's what my grandma believes, and here's, you know, and I've got to find a way to make something work for my whole family. And you have a job you're doing and you're not paying attention day to day. It had to be so tough for everyone involved, from even the decision makers on down to the publics. And I have so much sympathy for everyone who had to communicate in this event, who had the burden of shouldering responsibility for making key decisions for evacuation, and for the people who had to make decisions for themselves and their families. This was hard. And I think we all, you know, as I said, with the December 10th, you know, outbreak, when everyone was just heartbroken over the event, I think take some time to let yourself feel all the sad, and to recognize that everyone involved in this is human, and we're trying to do the best we can, and give yourself a little grace.
You always know the right thing to say. Kim, thank you. Rich, I know you've given us an extra 45 minutes beyond what we had contracted for. You're welcome to stay for the next 15.
Your $1,000 is chewed up, buddy. that $1,000 check is gone.
I know we probably ran out of our retainer.
Hey, Bill, just give him a Corvette, okay?
Well, that's exactly right.
How about a new car? It's a lovely
Rich,
Etagere.
Harvey says that there are only 2 podcasts he listens to. One of them's WeatherBrains. The other is your show. Talk about your podcast for just a minute.
Oh, can I share a screen with you?
Absolutely. Well, I don't know. James is listening. James,
that's all right.
turn it on.
It's called. I stole this. You ready? Come on down.
Yeah, James has turned it on. So if you want to share your screen, you're welcome.
It's called "Come On Down with Rich Fields." I don't even know how to minimize. I've got everybody up here. I'm not a brain on the computer, but it's called "Come On Down with Rich Fields," and it's all about my time in Hollywood and working on the 8 network game shows that I worked on, and really what happened behind the scenes. And we have a lot of special guests on. We've got Vanna White coming up. We've got Bob Goen. Matter of fact, Bob Goen was supposed to be tonight, and we canceled Bob and moved him to the 10th because we knew this when the storm was coming in, and we thought, oh, we're not going to be ready to have a podcast on Monday. But here you guys are doing one. So, but it's a lot of fun.
In trouble like you guys are. We're watching from the armchair. But we've really been honored to have you here, and I can't wait for
my pleasure. Next time, let's go through some of the memorabilia around the place. I got lots of it.
Kim is clapping as we all are. That would definitely be a
here's
fun
an
one.
unpainted I Dream a Genie bottle given to me by Sidney Sheldon.
Oh my goodness. Taking me back to my time on a TV tray.
I'm just putting this out there. If you need someone to give that to someday, my first daughter's name is Jeannie. So if you would just like to, pass that along. Anyway.
Have you opened the top of the bottle? What happened?
Yeah.
It opens. Can anybody guess what these are? Maybe you might know if you've seen them online.
Hold it up there a little closer, Ruth.
Oh.
Can you tell what they are? Those are baby shoes.
Yeah, baby shoes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Those are Roddy's baby shoes. The former announcer of The Price is Right. You see how the toes are cut out?
Mm-hmm.
Because his family in Texas couldn't afford shoes, so they just kept cutting toes out. It's just
there you go.
Pudgy little body just kept getting bigger and bigger. Oh, you guys will like this. Our morning meteorologist, Grant Gilmore, on the 50th anniversary of The Price is Right, in graphics on WSI, he made a whole wheel that spins, and it'll stop on the day's forecast, through the CSV file. You can have it stop wherever you want. And here he is showing it to me for the first time. It was pretty awesome stuff. So I have so much stuff. This is Bob Barker's. This is a script from the very last episode of The Price is Right that Bob hosted. This is my script, and I had Mr. Barker autograph it for me.
Oh my goodness.
I've got so much, man.
So fun.
Mhm.
Well, Rich, it's really been an honor.
Thanks for
here
having
tonight.
me, everybody. Really
appropriate.
appreciate it.
Thanks,
I'm no
Rich.
weather brain, so thank you so much.
Well, you made our show great tonight. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
James Adelite, any last thoughts? And then I'll let you carry us to the recorded segments.
I guess the question would be for Rich and the panel. What's going to change to make the impact of the next one not be as severe? Land use practices, restricted redevelopment. There's no time like now to minimize the damage of the next one.
Well, it may not be a decision even for folks to have to make. I mean, insurance companies have been leaving the state in groves. I mean, so pretty soon this land isn't going to be insurable, and there's naturally going to be a setback. I don't know how long it's going to take, but I mean, that's the trend. That's what's happening right now. It's been happening before Ian. So now watch how many insurance companies leave the state.
No, it's I read something today, Rich, about it, and it's not pretty for the state of Florida. I mean, not pretty at all.
And I live on the beach. So I worry about getting flood insurance.
Yep.
One might say the price is wrong.
There we go.
I had to. I'm
Nicely
sorry.
done.
So
All right.
sorry.
Your bid was way over.
Yeah, exactly.
Where's the sound effects, man?
I was about to do,
Oh, Rich, please don't ask that. Don't ask that.
Only one foghorn's allowed, right?
I know.
Rich, it was such a treat to have
Oh,
you.
thanks. Pleasure to meet all of you finally in person. Really nice. Thanks,
I
man.
hope you get a chance to rest up, and both mentally and physically.
It's funny you say that, because even still today, words aren't coming as quickly. I mean, just the fatigue is there. I told you we were on 12-hour shifts for like 3 days, and I had one day off. I had Friday. I was able to sleep finally on Friday, and then I worked Saturday and Sunday mornings, and then today, obviously, and still, I mean, it's wild what your brain goes through and tries to compartmentalize and decide what's right to say, what not to say. I don't want to panic people, but I want to give them the right information. I mean, it's a lot. It's a lot. I'm not the only one. I mean, there's dozens of them around here.
Awesome. Rich, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you, guys.
And best of luck to you and all the people affected by this terrible catastrophe. But now we will shift gears and head over to Tony Rice and our astronomy outlook, right?
That's right.
Looking beyond the atmosphere, here's Tony Rice with your astronomy outlook.
October will be great to spot Mercury in the pre-dawn sky, especially this week and next. That first rock from the sun reaches greatest elongation, or the separation in our sky from the sun. This makes tiny Mercury, which is more often hidden in the sun's glare, much easier to see. Mercury also reaches its highest above the horizon on Saturday morning. To find it, look low on the eastern horizon between an hour and half hour before sunrise. Elsewhere, in Washington, or actually in low Earth orbit, the FCC approved new rules last week governing the disposal of defunct spacecraft. Previously, satellite operators had 25 years to deorbit once they'd reached their end of life. These new rules require them to dispose of them as soon as is practical and within 5 years. While everyone in Washington seems to agree that space junk is a problem, there's much less agreement on the steps to address it. That FCC decision prompted criticism from Congress, specifically the House Science Committee, who questioned the agency's authority to create such rules. Satellite operators also took issue, asking for a waiver process. But when you look at the numbers straight from U.S. Space Command, that is responsible for monitoring everything in orbit, including debris, the space industry has been doing a pretty good job of making progress recently. Looking just at rocket bodies, those upper stages of rockets that are used to push the payloads into their final orbit, big debris like that has gone from spending an average of about 2.5 years in orbit back in 2000 to an average of about 8 days for payloads that were launched this year. That's your astronomy outlook. Follow me at RTP Hokie for more spacey stuff like this.
how terrible I'm muted coming out of the recorded segments. How awful that is. It's so awesome to have Tony Rice's report every week. I know we talked about this last Monday night, but I'm still amazed by that DART spacecraft that we launched in interstellar space defense. I thought that was one of the coolest things I've seen in a long time. It's been a very sobering show tonight. It was fun to have Rich on. It would have been more fun probably on a night that was less impactful, but let's go straight to picks of the week here so we can get ready to wrap this up. Rick Smith, you got a pick of the week for us?
Yep. I called an audible with my pick of the week during the show here because we're talking about Charlie so much. And somebody did it on Twitter. I'm not taking credit for it, but earlier they took a portion of the service assessment for Hurricane Charlie back in 2004, and it reads almost like what this section of the service assessment for Hurricane Ian will probably say about, a lot of the same issues. So my pick of the week is a link to that service assessment. It's really interesting to go back and read all of those, but the one for Charlie, there's some eerie similarities between Charlie and Ian. So that's my pick.
It's very haunting, and I wish I'd spent more time talking about that on Wednesday and even Tuesday night when it became apparent. When those first radar images were coming off of Cuba, and it seemed to be shifting a little to the northeast. It was like this is Charlie all over again. Thank you, Rick. That's a great pick and a good audible at the line there. I know I'm not allowed to talk about football tonight, but anyway, that's as close as I'll get. Troy Kimmel, how are things out there in Austin, Texas?
I've got to give a thanks long distance. I actually communicated email earlier, but thank you, Rick, for helping me with we talked about on the show last week, looking for the SAO decodings, surface aviation observations prior to the METARs, and working on a little project with that right now. And Rick went and looked on the bookshelf and got the copy of FAA document, actually the old aviation weather product document from the FAA. So thank you, Rick, for doing that. I am sitting here on a screen tonight, and I think it's interesting. You look back a week, and I've just been kind of mesmerized. I'm looking tonight at the southernmost point at Key West, and I thought about what it was a week ago tonight when I'm looking at it. Tonight, we're looking southwest off the southernmost point, and you've got the moon in the water. Water is much better behaved than it was about a week ago. But that's my pick of the week, the southernmost point, Key West, the cam there, the live cam. And I don't know, kind of relaxing tonight to look at it and know that things are at least a little better in that neck of the woods.
Yeah, and it was kind of amazing to go back and watch Mark Suttis' camera there in a time lapse of the thousands of people who went and hammed it up for the camera there, at that location, that iconic location. So that's a great pick. Thanks, Troy. Dr. Neil Jacobs, thank you, Dr. Coco McLean, James, Rick, everybody for the incredible, sharing of information the past couple of days. It's been very enlightening, and I know you've got a great pick for us that's really perfect in these sort of events.
Yeah, my pick of the week is National Hurricane Center's Storm Surge Risk. It's an interactive map. If you're not a fan of ArcGIS, this is all automated. It's very user friendly. You can go in here and zoom in on a particular piece of coastline and select a different category of storm, category 1, 2, or 3, or 5 hurricane, and look at the potential flood inundation impacts. And it's a real eye opener because these are calculated in 3 dimensions. So to some of the points that were discussed earlier, just because you live far away from the coast does not mean you are immune to storm surge, because it really depends on how high above ground you are, above sea level, and what the topography looks like between you and the ocean. And I think people will be pretty amazed at how far inland water can go in certain areas.
Well, it's been a very sobering show tonight, and that's just another critical component of our process. Dr. Coco McLean. Oh, I was supposed to go to James Adelot first. I've been up too long.
Me too. I've got 2 minutes left, but my pick of the week is the humanity in Hurricane Ian, with the guy who rescued the kitty cat off the air conditioner. And the reply to that tweet, one of them was, I think it was his girlfriend that posted it. "This is my boyfriend rescuing this cat." And then somebody replied, "He's everyone's boyfriend now."
Yeah.
Yep. And that was a different outcome to what could have been a near disaster for another TV meteorologist who found themselves in a similar situation.
Yep, and that kitty cat was rescued too. So
that's right. That's a good ending. We need good endings, Dr. Coco McLean. Do you have a good ending for us?
I'll try. So my pick of the week is actually Dr. Gina Esco's master's thesis. Her thesis is titled "A Study of Visual Communication, Cyclones, Cones, and Confusion." Part of what she was doing was actually interviewing forecasters at the National Hurricane Center. And she was trying to understand, a lot of the time we spend our post-event moments wringing our hands over what the public doesn't understand about the messages we're trying to promulgate. She dug in and found that not only is it the public that doesn't necessarily understand what is trying to be said, but there might not be a single message that forecasters are even unified in something that they're trying to say through a graphic such as the cone of uncertainty. She revealed that forecasters at the NHC had a number of different behavioral objectives in mind for the cone. And there's just a lot of stuff she uncovered that makes it very clear that forecaster to forecaster, there can be a lot of variability in what they're thinking about when they construct the cone, and they're considering things perhaps beyond just the objective hazard probability itself. So totally recommended, great read, and it's I think even more complicated conversation than we made it tonight. Thinking about
Dr. Jacobs, you pointed out from the conversation on this related thread that was going on today, someone brought up the question, should the cone be variable in situations of different uncertainty? We didn't talk about that tonight, but what's your feeling on that?
I can see some pluses and minuses. I mean, it makes a lot of sense if you've got a lot of ensemble spread, you can quantify it. If you've got a very tightly clustered set of ensemble members, you can also narrow the cone. But then I can also identify multiple tropical situations in the past where it would totally go off the rails, where in situations you have different national met centers producing different ensembles, which are tightly clustered within each ensemble, but are wildly divergent different camps. And this is where we get into different scenarios, and maybe one scenario is more likely than another. And does the manual forecast discount the less likely scenario? You could automate that, but then what happens if you get into a statistical tie? Then what do you do? I mean, there's all these different things that I think we need to come together as a community and sort of game these out and say, if we want to figure out what comes after the current cone, how do we do it, and where are all the failure points? It's not like we don't have, decades worth of historical storms to test these on.
Yeah, that's right. So, all right, what else? Who else? Any other business that we need to bring to the group tonight? Assuming there's not any, Troy Kimmel, I would entertain a motion that we adjourn.
I'd like to make a motion that we adjourn, and I'll second it, and third it, and fourth it.
All right. It's a long show, but it was a good show. WeatherBrains is the weekly netcast. It's all about weather. We record it Monday night, 7 o'clock Central Time, usually a labor of love we've been doing for somewhere around 16 years. It's going to be a lot of fun. If you're new to the show, you can access it in a lot of ways, all the various places you get your podcasts. All of our social media accounts are on the website, weatherbrains.com. And if you have an email or suggestion, a comment, a link, or a rant, send them to emails at weatherbrains.com. But till next Monday night, when we'll be talking about a franchising model for broadcast meteorology. I'm guest booking officer Bill Murray, reminding you to keep an eye to the sky, because you'll always have something fun to look at. And sometimes it's not so fun.
Yeah. It was a good show.
Really
Thanks,
good show.
y'all.